This is Audible.
The Infinite and the Divine by Robert Rath. Read by Richard Reed. Act 1. Maiden World. Nepereth. The star gods say that when we enter the fire, we shall not know death. But do you not see the tragedy? To know death is to know life. Halios. If the gods know not life, my Pharon, what do they know? Nepereth. Hate, Halios, eternal and unending. War in Heaven. Act 1, Scene 5, lines 3 to 5. Chapter 1. Before the being called the Emperor revealed himself, before the rise of the Aldari, before the Necrontyr traded their flesh for a mortal metal, the world was born in violence. And despite everything that would happen, this violence was more terrible than any the world later witnessed. For sweeping battlefronts are nothing compared to the torture of geologic change, and no warhead, no matter how large, can equal 1 billion years of volcanic upheaval. It was a nameless world, for no one yet lived there to name it. Ice sheets tall as a battle cruiser expanded and retreated. Tectonic plates ground continents together, their collision pushing up mountain ridges like teeth in the gums of a child. In the world's great ocean, an undersea volcano spewed white-hot magma into the darkness of the oceanic floor, gradually building an island, then another. The oceanic plate moved across the hotspot, carrying the created islands northwest as the volcanic boil continued to vent itself into the cold, black water. A long archipelago formed, like the dot-dash of an ancient code running across the jeweled blue of the sea. The first civilizations rose around these islands, in a manner of speaking. Microorganisms ruled the warm waters, their battle for survival as worthy as any that would come after. But their struggles, their triumphs and their cannibalisms went unremarked, even by the organisms themselves. Sentience was an unneeded complication. Then came the great city builders, colonies of coral polyps that erected great funnel towers, branching architectural lattices in green and magenta, cities full of life and activity. And like every great civilization, they built upon the skeletons of those that had come before. Layer upon layer, each generation withering and ossifying, so the living stood unthinking upon a vast necropolis of their predecessors. Perhaps the fish that weave through these great reefs were the first sentient beings on the world. They had little emotion, other than fear, pain, and hunger, yet their arrival presaged a new era. No longer was life there a march of unfeeling organisms that existed in order to exist. They could now perceive. When the great lizards emerged from the water, the struggle became one of legs and muscle and hearts beating blood fast through strong chambers. And though these great lizards were little more intelligent than the fish, they felt. They felt the pleasure of hot blood on their tongues, the agony of a festering wound, and maternal protectiveness. They died in great numbers, rotting corpses ground and crushed by geological processes into the diamonds and crude oil that other beings would, in time, murder each other to possess. And a few, just a few, would enter a state of deathless preservation. Trapped in silt and unable to fully decay, the calcium of their bones replaced atom by atom with rock, until they were but stone skeletons, immortal in form, yet with nothing of their bodies remaining, a mockery of the vital living creatures they once were. Life on the nameless world continued this way for billions of years, unheeded by the rest of the galaxy. Then, one night, a saurian scavenger sniffed the wind, sensing something had changed. Pointing her long snout towards the sky, she took in a sight that had never been encountered there before. New stars burned in the rainbow smear of the sky, points of light that clustered together with unnatural regularity. Lights that glowed with balefires, green as the island canopies, and moved across the sky as clouds did. To the scavenger's rudimentary brain, strange visual information like this could only be a hallucination brought on by consuming one of the island's poisonous plants. Her body triggered a purge reflex, vomiting egg yolk and root plants, before she darted for the twisted labyrinth of ground trees. As the scavenger watched, judging the threat, the lights descended. The creatures were large, with great sickle wings swept forward and bodies so black they barely stood out against the night. Like any who survived on the island, the scavenger knew a predator when she saw one. Cold emerald light spilled from the creatures' bellies, and the scavenger detected the foreign scent of sand baked into glass. Two-legged creatures stepped out of the emanation, feet shattering the plate of fused beach. Starlight glinted off their bodies like sun on the sea, and their eyes burned the same green as the lights on the flying predators. The world would be nameless no longer. Chapter 2. Eldari World of Sepharil, Eastern Fringe, 10,000 years before the Great Awakening. Ancient stories, passed from the lips of spirit singer to spirit singer, held that anyone who touched the stone would burn. Thy hand shall curl and turn black, thy back teeth glow white-hot, thy bones crack like firelogs, for I have drunk from elder sons. The songs held that the gemstone was a meteorite, wandering semi-sentient, absorbing the energy of each star it passed. During the war in heaven, it was said that warriors had used it to channel the gods themselves. Trazin, however, had learned long ago not to believe the absurdities of Eldari folklore. Ancient though their race was, they were still given to the follies of an organic brain. Trazin had travelled the galaxy for so long he'd forgotten what year he'd started. Collecting, studying, ordering the cultures of the cosmos. And one thing he'd learned was that every society thought their mountain was special, that it was more sacred than the mountain worshipped by their neighbouring tribe, that it was the one true axis of the universe. Even when informed that their sacred ridge was merely the random connection of tectonic plates, or their blessed sword a very old but relatively common alien relic, a revelation they universally did not appreciate, he found, they clung to their stories. Which is not to say there were not gods in the firmament, of course. Trazin knew there were, because he had helped kill them. But he'd also found that most of what societies took to be gods were inventions of their own, charmingly fanciful imaginations. But though he did not believe the gem channeled ancient gods, that did not mean it wasn't worth having, or worth the Eldari protecting. Indeed, the sounds of a siege echoed through the bone halls. Trazin allowed a portion of his consciousness to stray, if only to monitor the situation. Part of his mind worked the problem at hand. The other looked through the oculars of his Lich Guard captain. Through the being's eyes, Trazin saw that his Lich Guard phalanx still held the gates of the temple. Those in the front rank had locked their dispersion shields in a wall, each raising their hyperphase sword like the hammer of a cocked pistol. Behind them, those in the second rank held their war scythes as spears, thrusting them over the shoulders of their comrades so the entire formation bristled with humming blades. Perfectly uniform, Trazin noticed, and perfectly still. Exodite bodies littered the steps before them. Feather-adorned mesh armor split with surgical straight lines, limbs and heads detached. His olfactory sensors identified particles of cooked muscle in the air. Another attack was massing. In the garden plaza before the temple, where 5 dirt streets converged, Eldari exodites flitted between decorative plants and idols carved from massive bones. In the distance, he could see the lumbering form of a great lizard, long-necked and powerful, with twin prism cannons slung on its humped back. Trazin marked it as a target for the 2 doom scythes, flying a support pattern overhead. Shuriken rounds swept in, rattling the Necron shields like sleet on a window pane. One disc sailed into the ocular cavity of a Lich Guard and lodged there, bisecting the grim fire of his eye. The warrior did not react, did not break formation. With a shriek of protesting metal, the living alloy of his skull forced the monomolecular disc free, and it fluttered to the steps like a falling leaf. Trazin looked at the pattern of it through the captain's vision. Circular, with double spiral channels. A common Eldari design, not worth acquiring. He sensed a change in the air, and looked up to see the first doom scythe streaking down in an attack run. At the last moment, the great lizard heard it, rotating around its serpentine head to stare at the incoming comet. A beam of white-hot energy lanced from the doom scythe's fuselage, tracing a line of flame through the lush undergrowth. It passed through the creature's long neck, and the top third of it fell like a cut tree branch. The great body staggered, healed, stayed upright. Then the next doom scythe lanced it through the midsection and set off the payload on its prism cannons. Cascading detonations tore the creature apart, the purple energy blast throwing the weapon's crew hundreds of cubits away. Pity, Trazin thought, as he watched the carcass burn. I wanted one of those. But he had no time for such side projects. Conch shell horns sounded across the rainforest-girdled spires of the city, and already he could see more great lizards lumbering towards the temple. One rotated a twin-blade shuriken cannon towards the sky and began spitting fire at the retreating scythes. Though they were primitive, once the exodites marshalled their numbers, his small acquisition force would be overwhelmed. Sepharil was awakening to defend its world spirit. Trazin left the Lich Guard captain's body, rejoined his consciousness, and focused on the task at hand. Before him stretched a long wraith-bone corridor, likely salvage from whatever craft world these fundamentalists had used to begin their self-imposed exile. Bas-relief carvings depicting the society's exodus, fashioned from the bones of the great lizards, decorated the walls. Trazin had been scrying for traps, detecting pressure plates in a huge mechanical fulcrum hidden in the masonry. Behind that waited the cyclopean gates of the inner chamber. He finished his calculations and saw the way through. Trazin picked up his empathic obliterator and strode into the corridor. Eye holes in the bas-reliefs coughed, sending clouds of bone darts clattering off his necrodermis. Trazin snatched one out of the air and analyzed the tip. An exotic poison derived from a local marine invertebrate, unique to this world. He slipped it into a dimensional pocket and continued forward, sensing a stone shift and sink beneath him. A piece of masonry, hammer-shaped and weighing 6 tons, swept down at him like a pendulum. Trazin waved at it without stopping, the stasis projection from his palm emitter halting its progress mid-swing. He passed it without a glance, its surface vibrating with potential energy. Finally, the gate. Tall as a monolith. It was decorated with exquisite carvings of Eldari gods. A vertical strip of runes laid out a poem riddle so fiendish it would stop even the wisest if they did not know the obscure lore of the Taliak Sawen Nam, intoned Trazin, turning sideways so he could slip through the gates as they ground open. Normally, he would have put some effort into it, solved it by thought, then performed a textual analysis. Trazin enjoyed riddles. They revealed so much about the cultures that shaped them, but a noemic notice from his Lich Guards suggested that the exodites were pressing harder than anticipated. No time for amusing diversions. He hadn't paused to process the meaning of the runes, just fed them through his lexicographic database and cross-referenced double meanings, inferences and mythological connotations. Even now, He could not have explained what the answer to the riddle was, or what it meant. It was merely a linguistic equation, a problem with an answer. An answer that brought him into the presence of the world spirit. The chamber swept up around him like a cavernous grotto, its upper reaches lost in the echoing vaults of the ceiling. His metal feet sounded off a causeway, its wraith-bone marbled with veins of gold. Filigreed balustrades on either side mimicked the corals of the ocean depths, for Sephiroth was a world of warm seas and lush archipelagos. On either side of the walkway, pools of liquid platinum cast watery light across the walls. "Now," he muttered to himself, "where are you, my lovely?" Before him rose the world spirit. It curved ahead, inlaid into the vaulted surface of the far wall. It, too, was made of bone, but rather than the old, inert wraithbone of the walls and ceiling, this sprouted alive from the floor, branching like a fan of tree roots that had grown up instead of down. No, Trazyn corrected. That was not quite accurate. His oculus stripped away the outer layers of the world spirit, refocusing on the veins of energy that ran through the psychoactive material. Arcane power pulsed to and fro in a circulatory system, racing through arteries and nerves as it traveled to the highest forks of the network and back to the floor. Not roots, then. Antlers. Yes, that was it. A great set of antlers, large as a mountain, like the points of its forks curving away from the wall. Here and there it sprouted buds, fuzzy with new growth. Exquisite. Stepping closer, Trazyn appraised the object. The substance was not wraithbone, he noted, at least not entirely. This was a hybrid, a substitute grown from the skeletons of the great lizards and interwoven with the psychoplastic wraithbone salvaged from their crashed ship. A gene sequence scry failed to find where one substance began and the other ended. No points where the ancient craftsman had fused or grafted the two materials together. This was a seamless blend, nurtured and shaped over millions of years, wraithbone woven between the molecules of reactive but lower quality dinosaurid remains. A masterwork by one of the finest bone singers in the galaxy. An act of artistry and devotion that was at once temple, mausoleum, and metropolis. A place for the souls of his slain Eldari ancestors to be at rest, united and safeguarded from the hungry gods of the ether. Trazyn carried towards it on tireless legs, craning his hunched neck to see where the highest forks disappeared in the darkness of the vault. Once, his own kind had been able to accomplish work such as this, but the process of biotransference, the blighted gift that had moved their consciousness to deathless metal bodies, had also burned away nearly all artistry. His kind were no longer artisans or poets. Those few that retained the knack found their powers diminished. Now they forged rather than created. A work that took this much care, this much love, was beyond them. Such a shame he could not take the whole thing. Given time, he could extract it, perhaps even lock the entire temple in a stasis field and transplant it whole to his historical gallery on Solemnes. To have the gemstone in its original context would be a rare coup, but somehow these primitives had sensed the coming of his acquisition phalanx, and there was no time. In truth, he had broken protocol by waking even 30 of the Lich Guard before their time. Doing so had damaged their neural matrices, making them little more than automatons that followed tactical programs and explicit commands. But if they could not remember this expedition, so much the better. Trazyn was not supposed to be here anyway. He approached the base of the world spirit. The chamber was a full league across, and beheld the true genius of its creation. The structure sprouted from the skull of a predator lizard twice Trazyn's height, its lower jaw removed and sickle-like upper teeth buried in the wraith-bone floor. A glow, like the orange light cast by wind-stoked embers, emanated from the cavities of the creature's eye sockets. Trazin's vision stripped away layers of bone, and he saw the gemstone embedded in the predator's fist-sized brain cavity.
A carnosaur. Astonishing.
He brushed a metal hand over the skull's cranium, an emitter in the palm, casting electromagnetic radiation through its core. It was old, older than he had thought possible. Indeed, perhaps Trazin should have tempered his dismissal of the Eldari tales, for it was indeed a meteorite, and one of extreme antiquity and unknown makeup. He reviewed the spectromantic divination results manually to confirm its findings. Given the age of the components, their degradation and the style on the beam-cut faces of the gem, it was entirely possible that it dated from the War in Heaven. A delicious shiver passed through Trazin's circuitry.
"Well met, my dear,"
he said, his cooing tone offset by the hollow echo of his vocal emitter.
"It is not so often that I meet a thing as old as I am."
He was so entranced, in fact, that he did not see the dragon riders coming. Deep focus tended to dim his circumspection protocols, and the beast's footfalls had been masked via training and sorcery. And for all his inputs, scryers, protocols, and diviners, the movements of the Empyrean were muffled in his senses. When it came to warp sorcery, he was like a deaf man at a dinner table, able to make out words through dampened sounds and lip-reading, but unable to even notice the voices behind his back. An interstitial alert flashed in his vision, and he wheeled, dialing back his chronosense to slow the world and give himself time to calculate a microsecond decision. Scales, claws, and saw-toothed fangs were about to break down on him like a wave. 20 cavalry, riding knee-to-knee in tight formation, wraithbone lances braced, tattooed swirls on arrowhead-sharp faces. Scrimshawed charms dangled from the halters of their raptor mounts, each leather harness crisscrossing a scaled snout that ended in flared nostrils and hooked teeth. The raptors, underwater slow in Trazin's enhanced vision, swung their avian frames low, shifting weight to their bunched haunches in preparation for a final lunge. One lance came at him so directly its tip looked like a circle in his vision. Minimal options, none attractive. But his proximity to the world spirit had at least given him a moment to act as they pulled their charge, afraid of smashing into their venerated ancestral tomb. Trazin slid left, past the first lance tip. Before the warrior could swing the long weapon around, Trazin gripped the haft and tore the tattooed aspect warrior from his saddle. He watched the rider's face twist as he fell from the mount, long hair flying free and hands sheltering his face as he tumbled to the bone floor.
"Trazin, who is called Infinite,"
a voice said. It was not audible speech, nor was it telepathy, to which he was immune. Instead, it was a wavelength of psychic pulses pushing on his auditory transducer to mimic language. One of these riders must be a farseer. He ignored it. The riderless raptor struck at him, jaws closing on the place where his ribcage met his hooded neck. Trazin had overcommitted himself and could not dodge.
"You will not keep what you seek."
Hooked teeth met the cold surface of his necrodermis and shattered. Trazin channeled kinetic force into his fist and punched the dinosaur in the throat. Vertebrae popped, cartilage tore. The raptor went down with the noise of a bugle player experiencing sudden and unbearable agony.
"Listen to the song. The world sings for the blood of Trazin."
And it was true. Even through the syrupy haze of slowed time, he could hear the keening chants of the knights. That he did not have blood was no matter. These Eldari wanted it anyway. But their formation was not optimized to deal with a single opponent. It was jumbling, folding as the knights tried to get to him, and he had just created a gap. As the unit tried to wheel on itself, Trazin slipped through the hole in the line, making sure to step on the fallen warrior on his way through. Behind him, riders collided and mixed.
"Eldari,"
he scoffed.
"So old and wise. You are children to us." This world spirit is our ancestry, Trazin, our culture, our dead, and it will wither without the solar gem.
That's when Trazin saw the Carnosaur. He'd missed it before now, his focus overwhelmed by the charging raptor riders and senses clouded by witchery. It reared above him, its well-muscled chest protected by a breastplate shaped from dinosaurid bone. Twin-linked shuriken cannons emerging like tusks from its chin. Serrated blades, fashioned from the teeth of aquatic predators, studded the armor plates clamped to its feet and spine. A calcium scythe capped its lashing tail. And on its back, the Farseer, her willow-thin face half covered by the mask of an unfamiliar god, graceful frame armored in mother-of-pearl, and pink hair gathered into a topknot.
We have long known that you desire it, but if you take it, the world spirit will die.
If you knew I was coming, Trazin said, you should have made a contingency plan.
I know you will return, the Farseer said, but I will still enjoy this.
The Carnosaur bit down on him at the waist, his whole upper half trapped inside the wet darkness of its mouth. 9-inch fangs, even now he could not stop analyzing, cataloguing, sank into the tough tubes and pelvic ambulation structures of his torso. Vital systems tore and failed. Emerald sparks erupted from the wound, lighting the interior of the Carnosaur's mouth with baleful flashes. He felt his legs separate. Trazin channeled his diminishing reserves into a fist and reshaped it into a brutal spike. He stabbed at the Carnosaur's lashing tongue, hot reptilian blood spurting over his oculars. To his annoyance, his systems autonomously ran an analysis of the genetic makeup. He marked it to read later. The muscular tongue flipped and rolled him to the side. He sprawled, saw a saw-toothed strip of light as the jaws opened. He regretted slowing his chronosense as he watched the row of jagged teeth close on him, puncturing his oculars, driving through his neural fiber spools, and crushing his skull. Chapter 3.
The world song moves us, speaks to us. Touch the rocks, young warrior, and you will feel it vibrate the very stone. When the metal glutton comes, you will know it is time to fight for this world.
Prophecies of Orluncia of Sephiroth, Tablet 7, Inscription 12. Trazin did not, on the whole, enjoy being dead, which is why, unlike the Eldari sorceress, he'd made contingencies. His consciousness rushed into the Lich-Guard captain's mind, overriding the native personality and banishing it to the depths of the captain's engrammatic databanks. Depending on the host, this could be a struggle, but the captain had awoken from stasis damaged and simple, an easy takeover. It was a state Trazin preferred in his companions, to be honest, since it made them less likely to speak of what they'd witnessed. The awakened council knew of Trazin's project and his galleries, but not everything he collected would meet with their approval. And they would particularly disapprove of awakening their kin early and getting them destroyed for a personal venture like this. Within a second, he reshaped the captain's malleable necrodermis, the living metal flowing and changing to take on Trazin's familiar shape. His hood sprang up segment by segment, rising over his head as the Lich-Guard's death mask rearranged into his own features. A cloak grew out from his shoulders, each scale popping into existence with a little ping. When he gained vocal control, the first thing he said was, "Damn." His newly hijacked oculars told him that things were no longer running to plan. 4 Lich-Guard lay on the steps, sparking green, their metal flesh attempting to knit together despite horrendous wounds. The shuriken fire was a torrent now, coming from every angle. Skirmishers fired and moved in blurs so fast Trazin could barely see their troop type.
One doom scythe wobbled by, its exterior choked by pterosaurs that had hooked onto its superstructure, digging into its wires and its exposed cockpit. As he watched, one took the pilot's head in its beak and with a twist of its long neck snapped it away. The doom scythe lost control and tumbled into the rainforest like a tossed coin. It struck the plaza and ploughed through a bone god column before detonating in a superheated blast of smoke and emerald lightning. He had brought a team of only 30 Lich Guard, a night scythe for transport and 2 doom scythes for aerial cover, the sort of force that would not raise any alarms among the council upon its awakening. Even for the Eldari, whose speed made them dangerous, that was generally enough. A shock assault force to secure the target or create a diversion, while Trazyn recovered the specimen. On a normal acquisition, they were on the ground for no longer than an hour, often half that. They usually withdrew, just as the locals mounted a response. But the counterattack had been almost instantaneous, as if the Eldari had detected the Necron air assets or sensed the distortion of the Night Scythe's transport wormhole. Or they foresaw me coming, Trazyn thought. Oh, cursed witches! A pterosaur, its hide painted ochre with handprints, dived into the formation and snatched up a Lich Guard like a bird of prey taking a rodent. It flew the struggling warrior up into the air, its rider leaning out of the saddle almost upside down to riddle the Necron with dual shuriken pistols. Then the beast dropped him 300 cubits to the plaza flagstones. Trazyn saw more pterosaur riders incoming, a V in the sky, preparing to heel over and dive. "Fall back!" he called. "Fall back inside the temple! Defend the sanctum! Beware aerial attacks!" The force retreated in lockstep, without a glance backward to place their feet. He summoned his empathic obliterator, the long haft of the weapon starting in his palm and building itself one atom at a time, until it stood 8 feet tall from pointed base to the glowing jade wings of its head. Trazyn swept over his formation, doubling their marching speed, and then pointed the obliterator's inbuilt resurrection orb at the fallen Lich Guard, watching as their shattered bodies glowed with arcane energies, spines snapping and joints popping as bent limbs straightened and dismembered pieces flew together as if magnetized. As the tide of Eldari surged up the steps, a Lich Guard sprang back to its feet among them, one arm still missing, its hyperphase sword carved bloody crescents in the exodites. The Eldari skirmishers fell upon him, and the other rising dead, piercing their metal bodies with knives. "That should stall them," Trazyn said, and turned back into the temple. He passed the outer sanctum of coral statuary, tramped through the rain of poison darts in the corridor, and pushed the hammer column, still locked in stasis, contemptuously aside. This time he uttered no riddle. He simply took his obliterator in both hands and brought it down on the join.